Alrighty, welcome to the 148th edition of the MMA Circus here on BloodyElbow.com and live on YouTube. My name's Nick Baldwin of BloodyElbow.com. I'm your host as always, and joining me as our guest co-host this week is a UFC content editor and producer of talent relations over at TSN. It is Aaron Bronsteter back on the show for the second time. But Aaron, it's been a long time. And I apologize right off the bat. Very Canadian of me to apologize before you even say a word, but sorry for not getting you on sooner. It's been a long time. We last talked in December 2015. You have a lot going on. You've had since then a baby. You've gotten a new role at TSN. I've done a bunch of new things, different things. But first, how are you doing? I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, I'm good, man. I'm always eager to do it. I know we've had some scheduling conflicts recently, so I'm glad that we're able to set this up and get going.
No kidding. I remember listening to you on the Parting Shot podcast. You often did the year-end predictions and award show with, I guess, sometimes James and Adam Martin, but also James and Carlin in later years. And I remember on one of them, maybe the 2016 one, you said, maybe let's make this not a yearly. Let's make it maybe bi-yearly or something like that. But I don't know. It's been 2 years. It's crazy. But thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it. Right off the bat, got to talk about Toronto a little bit, Toronto weather. Typically, somehow when my co-host Andrew Lawrence and I am doing the show, we just talk about Winnipeg weather because it's just so awful. It's terrible outside right now. It's windy, blowing snow, it's cold. But what else are you going to expect from Winnipeg in January? What is Toronto like right now? I'm curious.
Well, what you do is you take Winnipeg and you subtract like maybe 10 degrees, and that's what Toronto's like. So it's cold. It's very cold here right now. But I'm not going to say that I'd rather be in Winnipeg because I wouldn't. Sure.
No. I guess Winnipeg would be like the worst city in Canada besides any like the northern territories. As far as a province goes, this and Saskatchewan, it's not good. It is not good.
No, it's cold. I mean, people every year in Winnipeg, you know what, let me give you a good behind the scenes story. So before the UFC went to Winnipeg, there are people behind the scenes, and Robin was with me, and Robin's from Pinawa, which is right outside of Winnipeg.
Right. Yeah.
And we were saying to them before they went to Winnipeg, like, every year they're like, oh yeah, we expect it's gonna be cold. I go, no. Every year people like stumble home from the bar and they fall and they die because they can't get up and their organs fail on them because it's so cold. That's how cold it is. And they're like, oh my God. And they were very worried. And some of them wanted to not go, but they ended up going. They sucked it up.
So they're falling. Are they?
I didn't go. I didn't end up going. Robin ended up going.
Or are they just that drunk and it's cold? And because I know that makes me think of James Lynch when he separated his shoulder or something last year because he fell in Mexico. And I guess it wouldn't have been cold there, but that's what came into my mind.
No. So people in Winnipeg, they fall and they die.
Yeah,
because it's so cool.
That's crazy. I'll keep that in mind.
Same within Saskatchewan. Like elderly people will like slip and fall, and like they're not able to get up on time before they freeze to death. That's how cold it is there. So that's elderly, a perspective for people watching.
I'll keep that in mind when I walk outside after the show.
You're not legal drinking age or elderly, so you're good.
I hope so. Although it is Winnipeg, so you never know.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's get into some MMA talk because at the end of the day, people are tuning in a little for the weather, but probably mostly for some mixed martial arts talk. A lot has been going on. We had a huge fight announcement. Heavyweight title is on the line, UFC 226. We'll get to that a little bit later, but I guess we'll start out with what happened this past weekend. You had UFC on Fox 27 in Charlotte, North Carolina. In the main event, middleweight contenders Ronaldo, Jacare Souza, and Derek Brunson squared off for the second time. It was a rematch from a Strikeforce bout 4 or 5 years ago, and it looked kind of similar. Jacare Souza turned back the clock a little bit because a lot of people going into this fight thought Jacare Souza is old. He's 37. He's 38. He is not himself. Robert Whittaker, took his soul, changed him forever. He won't be the same guy, the same jiu-jitsu ace, the same killer, really, everywhere. But that wasn't the case. Derek Brunson again had his chin up a little too high. He was a bit too wild, swinging shots, and then Jacare Souza cracked him with an unbelievable head kick and followed up with a bit of ground and pound. And as I said, turned back the clock. Jacare Souza is not done. Were you surprised about this? I don't know what your pick was going in, but I was a little surprised. I didn't think Jacare Souza would look this good physically.
I was more surprised that Jacare was an underdog by the time the fight started. It's the first time he's ever been an underdog in the history of his MMA career, which is pretty absurd. Yeah, but I think Jacare is a tier above Derek Brunson, and that's what I thought going into the fight, and Jacare proved me right. You should also mention that Robert Whittaker put it on Derek Brunson pretty badly as well. Derek's rebounded from that and has had some wins, but Jacare is really in a league of his own when it comes to jiu-jitsu in MMA, and he didn't even need it against Derek Brunson. He was able to put it on him. He didn't take Derek Brunson down, so Derek Brunson still has never gotten taken down in a UFC fight, but he did get knocked down and he did get finished, and I thought the finish was a good stoppage by the referee, even though Derek disagreed with it at the time. And Jacare, man, he's in a league of his own.
Yeah, well, if anybody is in a league of his own, it's Robert Whittaker. But Jacare, as far as if he's fighting,
Brunson, well, I'm just talking about in terms of a guy who has that high level jiu-jitsu and that high level striking. Right. Really, there are very few guys in MMA that you can say that about, where they're as dangerous on the feet as they are on the ground. And I'm not sure if Jacare is as dangerous on the feet as he is on the ground, but there are levels to this thing, and he's very high level on the feet as well as on the ground. He's a very dangerous guy, and Whittaker beating him, I think, was sent a big message as to how good Robert Whittaker is.
Right, and maybe in hindsight, maybe not as much as how done Jacare Souza was thought to be. But I do feel like Jacare's striking is generally overlooked. Like going in, I'm thinking, like my idea, of course. I hate to say this was a fade on Jacare, like my pick of Derek Brunson, but it kind of was. I thought he would be a lot, just looked older. He kind of looked like that in the Whittaker fight, and I expected to see a similar Jacare. But I think this sort of goes to show that, as you said, Jacare's striking is good. Like he can handle his own on the feet. He can do well on the feet, and that's something not a lot of people really talk about when we're breaking down who Jacare Souza is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he showed it against Derek Brunson. He's very dangerous on the feet. He can do just about anything on the feet, and be just as dangerous as almost anybody else in the middleweight division, save for Robert Whittaker, maybe Kelvin Gastelum, who's very good on the feet in terms of their overall power. So Jacare is going to be a tough out, man. Like there's still time on his clock to get things going. And I saw, unfortunately for Jacare, that Robert Whittaker is back in the gym as per his Instagram account. So we weren't sure the severity of that injury, but if he is in fact back in training, it'll probably be a little while before Jacare gets a shot if he does.
Which is unfortunate, just because Jacare Souza, I know I've said this on other podcasts of mine leading up to this fight. Jacare Souza might be one of the best fighters ever in the UFC not to get a title shot. And but I can see there isn't a very clear path for Jacare to UFC gold. He's lost to Whittaker, but beyond that, Luke Rockhold and Yoel Romero are fighting in about 10 days or so for the interim title. And it's kind of weird because the middleweight division, for basically since Michael Bisping knocked out Luke Rockhold June 4th, 2016, so coming up, a year and a half or more, it's been held up. And we finally thought when GSP vacated the title, Whittaker is now the champion, it's back in order. But I feel like it might start getting held up again because we have Jacare, who might deserve some sort of title shot, real or interim. We have Chris Weidman, who's coming off the win over Gastelum. He's hurt, but ready to go soon. I feel like we're kind of back to where we were in a way.
Yeah. And let's not forget Gastelum beating Bisping, the ex-champion, right? So he can stake a claim to that as well. And he was a little bit disappointed that he got passed over for that interim shot in favor of Yoel Romero, who's coming off of a loss. So all of those guys can rightfully stake claim to a spot. And then you've got other guys like these young killers, like Paulo Costa coming up in the division as well. So it'll be interesting to see. And Eric Anders could make a name for himself this weekend in Belem. I know we'll discuss that a little bit later on, but it's an interesting time as always for the middleweight division.
Where do we see Jacare? Like, as far as if we're going to speculate and predict a little bit, like how far away? Because personally, I think what they should do is Jacare versus Chris Weidman. This is a fight I've wanted to see for a while. It could have been for when Weidman was the champion. It could have been, well, it made sense, maybe the most sense it ever has after UFC 194 when Rockhold defeated Weidman and Romero defeated Jacare. Then you would have had, if it wasn't for Yoel Romero and his Tatum supplements, we would have had Rockhold Romero for the undisputed title and Weidman Jacare in sort of a rebound fight for both of them. And so I feel like the time is now to make that one considering it sort of made sense for the better part of 2 years. What do you make of that, or do you want something different? Maybe you do Jacare Gastelum. There's a few options.
I think right now we'll see what happens with the Jacare, but the way I'd like to see it play out is you have Yoel and Rockhold. That's obviously coming up this month, and then you see how far away Whittaker is. If Whittaker's good to go in like 3 or 4 months against the winner of that fight, then Jacare might be able to just hang on and say, I want the winner of that fight. But I think Jacare is probably going to need another win to be the definitive top contender after that whole, thing is sorted out with those 3 guys.
Now, on Derek Brunson, I'm interested to see where he goes from here. I suspect he rebounds in similar fashion to when he was knocked up by Robert Whittaker back in November 2016, minus the Anderson Silva weird fight that he should have won that he ended up losing. I don't think that'll be there. I think he'll win his next fight, but this sort of goes to show that Derek Brunson is never going to be a UFC champion. He's never going to fight for the title, I don't think, considering he's already probably 33-ish. He's not, 33, 34. And so that's not old for the middleweight division. He's younger than, in fight years, he's not super old. He hasn't taken a ton of damage, but it's not like he's a fresh prospect. And so I'm interested to see where he goes from here. But I think this sort of, again, kind of like the Whittaker fight, proves that he'll always be a high-level gatekeeper, if that makes sense.
He's a tier 3 guy. I think there are tiers to every division. Right now, if you look at tier 1, it's Whittaker. And, you might be able to say, whoever wins Rockhold, Romero is kind of up there at tier 1. And we saw how close that fight between Whittaker and Romero was, even though Whittaker got injured early into that fight. But those are like the tier 1 guys. Then you've got the tier 2 guys who are the Gastelums, the Jacares, the Weidmans, the Rockholds, or Romero, whoever wins or loses that fight. And that's kind of where I think the cutoff is. And I think Mousasi would have fit into that second tier as well. It drops a little bit. Current to Anderson Silva, current Lyoto Machida is probably tier 3. So those are kind of the gatekeeper type guys, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Although I feel like the only disagreement would be that Derek Brunson, although I feel like tier 3 makes sense, but then we ought to put Machida and Anderson, I think, below that though. Although
but probably
divisions are so up in the air right now, literally all of them. So
yeah, at this point in time, I mean, who knows when Anderson's coming back? We'll have to see what Machida's still got left in the tank this weekend. So I guess that's fair.
That's true. What did you make of the rest of this card? I mean, I think the biggest talking point, and it sort of goes to show that it wasn't the best card ever on paper or off, when the biggest talking point is horrible judging. We had in the co-main event, Andre Fili get the biggest win of his featherweight career against Dennis Bermudez, who's sort of been a staple in the division for quite some time. But I scored it for Bermudez. I had it 30-27 for the Menace. I think I struggle to see how you can get to a scorecard for Fili. It was a close fight, but I felt like it was clear. If you want to give Fili 1 round, fine. If you want to give him 2, I don't agree. So it's great for Fili because he's sort of gotten over that hump he hasn't been able to really ever. We've had so high of expectations for Touchy-Feely, and he hasn't sort of lived up to them. Now he is, but it would have been much better if he lived up to them, and it actually should have happened. But we also had on the prelim card, or even on the first fight of the night, Drew Dober and Frank Camacho. That was a great fight. It was a close fight, 29-28 either way, but one judge had it 30-27, Drew Dober. And there was one round that was for sure Camacho. So can't agree with that. Earlier, we had Caitlin Chukagian, Maura Romero Balella. Could have gone either way, up for debate in that one. Chukagian, of course, got the win. And then I think the worst one of any fights on this card, Justine Kish losing to Ji-Yeon Kim. One judge had it 30-27 for Kim, and I don't know anybody else in the world that scored it for Kim, even 29-28. We had a lot of weird judging in North Carolina.
Yeah, definitely weird judging, but a lot of those were point fights. Like those were fights there where I wouldn't say that a lot of them were very definitive for each person. I think some of them could have gone either way. I think they were favored more, like the Kish fight. I think a lot of those were favored more towards Kish, but her effect, like she, if you look at strictly the stats, her output was a lot better. But I thought that she took more damage in that fight and that Kim landed the better strikes. Did I score it for Kim? No. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that to call those any three of those fights a robbery is a little bit of a stretch. Was the judging suspect? Sure. Like insulted by any of those cards. Like I felt like, we didn't see much in either of those fights to really swing it one way or another.
It's fair. I see where you're coming from. I think some people.
I mean, I had Camacho, I had Bermudez, and I had Kish. So
right
on my cards, but the fact that it went the other way, I wasn't like, "Oh, that's ridiculous." I was just like, those fights. I guess I could see how they got it the other way, but it is what it is. I don't think that there was anything particularly egregious with any of those cards. I think the 30-27s, as you mentioned, are pretty crazy. I don't agree with those, but again, I don't think enough happened in those fights to really sway me to say that any of those were really a true robbery.
I think that's a good point. Although some people were saying I didn't care about this fight enough to get mad at the decision, or this wasn't good enough of a fight. But I feel like if I don't care how high the stakes are, but if it was that bad of a decision, you should have some sort of disagreement. I know like some people didn't enjoy the Kish Jeon Kim fight, but it's still a bad decision. It still shouldn't have gone the way it did. So maybe it's just me. Maybe I'll end up going gray early because I'm having holding a grudge with the judges in North Carolina. But some of these were definitely just again. I didn't lose sleep over it, but again, just a little strange to say the least. But I think that also goes.
You lost DraftKings.
What's that?
Is how you clarify. You didn't lose sleep, but you might have lost DraftKings.
Maybe. Derek Brunson would have helped, but nevertheless, that's okay. 17 years old, can't play for money, so not really losing anything other than bragging rights over my Before the Battle co-host, Jed Mashu and Wes Riddle, because we do a three-way game, and Jed has won, I think, all three games in 2018. So
I got into a disagreement with Jed on Saturday night. Did you see my back and forth?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, he was saying that he didn't want to see a young guy come in and knock an old guy off, and that seemed to be the trend. I was like, well, Brunson's 34. And he goes, yeah, but Jacare's older in fight years. I go, Brunson's been knocked out more times than Jacare. And then by the time this conversation had ended, Jacare obliterated Brunson. But, no disrespect to Jed, but we're talking about a 34-year-old versus a 38-year-old. We're not talking about like Kelvin Gastelum versus Jacare. Brunson's an old guy. In MMA years, he's an old guy. That period.
And at the end of the day, Jacare Souza's knockout was not just impressive; it was also a conversation ender.
Yeah. Unfortunately for poor Jed, but I like Jed, so I don't want to pile on him. But I really disagreed with what he was saying. I felt passionately about it.
I think a couple of people in the YouTube chat, Liam Hughes particularly, a longtime listener of the show, and my others, he likes when my guest co-host, whether it's my real co-host Andrew Lawrence or my other guest co-host, when it's not Jed Mashu, he likes when my guest co-host trash on Jed Mashu. So you're keeping the trend of the MMA circus, and you didn't even know it, Aaron. So,
all right. Well, shout out to your loyal listeners who are anti-Jed guys. Although I'm not an anti-Jed guy, I'll just say that. But if I made someone say, then more power to you.
Well, as far as the fights go on this UFC Charlotte card, and this is the last we'll talk about it, because again, it wasn't not a ton happened. It wasn't the most memorable card, and let's be honest,
the lowest rated box card in history.
That's actually a good point. Yeah. What do you know exactly? Was it like 1.6 million?
1.7, I think, is what I saw.
1.7.
Jedi Goodman is always all over the ratings, so you can follow him on Twitter.
The good Jed.
He's fantastic. Yes. Yeah, the other Jed.
The better Jed. What did you make of this entire card? Like, was it exactly? Yeah, I'll take the credit, not the blame. What did you make though of the rest of the card? Like, were you sort of just sitting there watching this card or covering it, working? I don't know if you were. I guess you would have been working the card for TSN, right?
Yeah, I go into the office. And I watch it so that I don't have any family distractions, and I just chill out. I watch it, and I do my my UFC notebook column for tsn.ca/UFC, and I thought it was a good card. I thought that it was nice to see Randa Marcos get the Canadians into the win column so far this year. I thought she won that fight in pretty dominant fashion. She keeps going win lose. So hopefully she can get a winning streak started. But yeah, the card didn't blow me away. I thought for a Fox card it was it wasn't as stacked as it could have been. It would have been nice to see a better co-main, just a stronger main card.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. I thought that the fights were very good. I thought there was a bit of a lull during the prelims when they had the 3 straight women's fights that all went to decision. But other than that, I thought that the card was pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. Although I'm surprised by the lower level quality of these big Fox cards, just because this is the last year. This is the last year of the Fox deal. It's up in basically at the end of 2018. I think it's one. Might be November, December. I don't know the month, but it's up in less than a year. And so I would think, or I would have thought that they're stacking these cards. They're putting champions on Fox cards there. They're making these 4-fight Fox cards pay-per-view quality, and they're making them Fight Pass card quality. Are you surprised?
Let's not go that far. That was at least an FS1 quality card.
Well,
and then the next one coming up is not great either. I mean, the one in a couple weeks.
But the thing is, you say it's an FS1 card, and I kind of agree, maybe closer to FS1 than Fight Pass, but FS1 are usually 6 fights, and you can't pick out 6 fights that make a good FS1 card. I don't think.
Maybe. I mean, you might have a point, but I mean, they don't structure them that way for Fox. They try to have 4 really good fights, but I didn't think the main card had those 4 marquee fights you would have liked to see. And the next card that's going to be Jeremy Stevens and Josh Emmett. That's not really a juicy headliner either for a Fox card.
So is this surprising? Like, are you sort of with me? And did you expect to see big Fox cards, like literally big?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe right now it looks like right now they've got their foot, off the pedal a little bit. And then once summer starts revving up, I mean, 226 looks like it has the potential to have 3 champion versus champion fights, which is just absurd. And they're starting to kick it up into high gear as the year goes on. But I would have thought that early this year they would have really had a strong push, because I think UFC 221 and UFC 222 are cards that leave much to be desired as well.
That's the thing, though, with those 3 champion fights, if they happen. I mean, of course, we know Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier is happening, but they're also considering doing TJ Dillashaw versus Demetrius Johnson, and also Chris Alborg versus Amanda Nunes. So that's half of the UFC champions, 6 of 12. And I do like the rest of the year after that card, if that goes as planned, if that ends up happening, is going to be terrible. We're going to have 6 champions basically for not quite the rest of the year. A couple might make a quick turnaround, but like we're going to have maybe Robert Whittaker. He's still sick. We don't know. We'll have Max Holloway, although he's fighting in March. So, I mean, you'll have Max Holloway. Conor McGregor you can't count on, and Khabib Ferguson winner, who knows what they'll even be as far as real champion, interim champion. Then you'll have Tyron Woodley. You'll have, after that, Nico Montano. You'll have Rose Namajunas or Joanna winner. I mean, I'm scared to think of what the second half of 2018 will look like if that goes on.
I strongly disagree with you. I have a column coming about it. It's actually my first column for tsn.ca/UFC, my first real opinion column, and that's coming out later this week, where I really outline why I think the time is now for these 3 fights. Whether they're on the same card or not, I don't care. I think that right now, if you look at those 6 divisions, for 5 of the 6 divisions, there is no clear contender, and that you're going to add a lot of allure to the UFC for this year with those kind of cards, with those kind of super fights. See, it's weird. Everybody always wants super fights. Oh, where's Anderson Silva versus George? Anderson Silva versus John Jones. These are the kind of fights that they should be making. And now they try to make 3 of them in one year, and now everybody's screaming, this is going to ruin the UFC's championship, and it's going to take away from the parity in the division, and it's going to leave all these contenders in the wake. Who are the contenders? Tell me, Nick. Other than the bantamweight division, who are the contenders at flyweight? Who are the contenders at women's bantamweight? Who are the contenders at women's featherweight? Who are the contenders at heavyweight? And who are the contenders at light heavyweight? Because, spoiler alert, there aren't any. None. So let's make intriguing fights here. It is a problem. It's absolutely a problem. But if you make these fights, now you have a chance to build contenders. Now you have a chance for a Ketlin Vieira to step up and be the top contender, or a Kat Zingano to step up and be the top contender. Because right now they just don't have one. They don't. There's nobody at bantamweight that is an intriguing fight with Amanda Nunes right now that will sell more than 100,000 pay-per-views as a headliner. There just isn't. So I think the UFC needs to focus more on big name fights. Like when the card in Edmonton was announced, UFC 215. Initially, it was supposed to be Valentina and Nunes, Demetrius and Borg, and Francis Ngannou and Junior Dos Santos. And I was saying, make Dos Santos versus Ngannou the headliner. That's the biggest name fight on the card. I don't care if there's a belt. That's the fight that they should be pushing. They should be pushing Francis Ngannou. They should be making it a showcase fight for him. You'll have 2 championships on the line underneath him. That will elevate him. It'll elevate his status. Unfortunately, the Francis Ngannou check didn't cash back at the last pay-per-view. But at the same time, I think that's what they should focus on, building cards. You don't need to make interim titles or forced title fights as the headliner. Make big fights as the headliners. Make fights that people want to see as the headliners. That's my opinion on it. And again, if you look at those divisions, those five out of those 6 divisions, I think bantamweight, you can make a case there are a lot of contenders right now. But if you look at the other divisions, there's nobody there. It's the cave is empty.
I agree on, you had a bunch of points there. I agree on some, disagree on others. With the, not every fight has to have an interim title attached to it. I, of course, agree. Interim titles are, I get it, what they are. They're a promotional tool, but at the end of the day, they don't need to exist. So I agree that, hey, Ngannou versus JDS over Nunes Shevchenko might have actually done better on pay-per-view. That would have been interesting to see. And that might have sort of led to more pay-per-view cards looking like that.
Yeah. I don't actually have a problem with interim championships. I think they're just a placeholder. Like if they were to do a bantamweight interim championship because Dillashaw is fighting at flyweight between, I don't know, Garbrandt and Rivera or something like that, I wouldn't care. Whatever. It's a placeholder. The belts, the fighters get paid more in these situations, and I'm happy to see that. I just don't know if you need to headline an event with a title fight every single time. I don't think it's necessary. But if you want to give these guys the chance to fight for a bantamweight interim title just because you want to have a clear-cut contender once the picture clears up with flyweight and bantamweight, and maybe Dillashaw wins flyweight and wants to stay at flyweight. Who knows? It would be good to have a bantamweight interim champion in that situation. I don't care. If it means Jimmy Rivera or Cody Garbrandt or a Sun Tzu getting paid more money, sure, more power to them. Let them do it.
So I don't necessarily have an issue with a fight like Dillashaw versus Johnson or Cormier, Stipe, or Nunes, Cyborg, but my main issue is having them all on the same card. Because if you space them out, fantastic. There's no concern to have a lackluster second half of the year. But if you put them all in July, I go back to my point, all these champions are going to be on the sidelines for the better part of half number 2 of the year.
I get that. But if you're the UFC, and you're doing UFC 226 and you have just Stipe versus Cormier, that's going to sell like 500 to 600,000 pay-per-views. If you have 3 championship fights, you go on a tour and you have all 6 of these champions and challengers, well, I guess all champions really, going on a tour and plugging this thing, you can get in like the $1.2 to $1.3 million threshold. That's an extra 700,000 buys. So if you put those fights on other cards, Cyborg versus Nunes as a headliner, TJ versus DJ as a headliner, and you take the sum of the parts, you're probably better off putting them all on one card.
I don't know if 3 on one card does that well, though.
Yeah, it's not definitive. It's a gamble. But I can see what they're thinking by putting them all on one mega card. Maybe that's the way that they should do it. That's what they've been doing the last 2 years, is building cards that they know are going to have big buys. And yeah, sure, it's some of the other pay-per-views suffer as a result, but I think they have enough of a base audience that they're going to get around 200,000 buys for any pay-per-view, just from the UFC fans, the UFC faithful.
I like all 3 fights. I mean, if they put them all on one card, that makes for one great event. But my sort of thing is that I'd rather sacrifice a huge event for 3 to 5 very good, reasonable cards rather than a huge event and rest, no one cares about them. But yeah, that's my point. But let's
it seems to be a problem a lot of people have is the watering down of the product after a big fight like that. And it's valid. It's valid. I don't necessarily agree with it in this instance, but sure, I'll agree that it's valid.
Let's talk about Stipe Cormier specifically, because that's the fight that is happening for sure. It's booked. It's signed. They're coaching the Ultimate Fighter 27. The undefeated season will have a bunch of 8 featherweights, 8 lightweights, all with undefeated professional records, getting at it, looking for what they call a 6-figure UFC contract. And so this is going to be interesting. I like the fight. I like Stipe Cormier. Basically, the thing is, as you already said, and as I suspect you'll be talking about in your column at TSN, the time seems right for this fight simply because there's no challengers at 205. There's no challengers at heavyweight. But I hate to take sort of a page out of Luke Thomas's book because he's been really pushing this point. But at the end of the day, I agree that This is a short-term solution. And the UFC, ever since being bought by WME now Endeavor, has been focusing a lot more on, I mean, from what I see looking in, they've been focusing a lot on short-term solutions and not long-term solutions. Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather was a massive success. It was the second biggest pay-per-view of all time. It sold 4 whatever buys. It was tremendous. It was a blockbuster. It did extremely well numbers. But now we don't have Conor McGregor back. Perhaps Conor McGregor might never fight again. We don't know at this time. We don't know if that fight didn't happen. Conor McGregor would have already had at least one UFC fight by now. He might be booked for another. Maybe we would have seen the Nate Diaz fight again. Maybe we would have seen him fight Tyron Woodley for the welterweight title to make it 3 UFC championships and make history and become even a bigger star. But now, because they did the Floyd fight, we don't have him, and we don't know what his future in MMA is. Even though he said he'll fight Tony Ferguson, he wants Khabib in Russia. That's what he's saying, but the fights aren't booked. Now we're getting Tony versus Khabib, and that's a great fight. But Conor McGregor isn't here, and that's just one example of focusing on short-term solutions and not the long-term. And I feel like I love DC Stipe. Love the fight. I'm looking forward to it. The time seems right because there's no challengers for either of them, but they're not focusing on building the divisions and helping and saving the divisions, because these divisions are really shallow right now. And I don't know if booking this super fight is helping.
So I've seen Luke's point, and I can't disagree more with it. And I like Luke a lot, so I'm not trying to poo-poo him. But if that's a short-term solution, what's the long-term damage? Like, give me an example of what the long-term damage could be for this fight.
Well, the thing is, like, the long-term damage is that these divisions aren't getting built up, and DC
build though. They have time to build now. Now they have time to build because these guys are fighting each other. Like, I suggested that this is how desperate the heavyweight division is. I suggested that if Curtis Blades beat Mark Hunt, that he should be next in line for a heavyweight shot because he would have the best resume. So, how many buys does a Stipe Miocic Curtis Blades fight do on pay-per-view? Like
200.
Well, let's be real. Exactly. So let's be real here and say that, and then you look at light heavyweight, the long-term damage is what? I mean, the lightweight title's not on the line. Light heavyweight title's not on the line here. Really, the worst case scenario, which actually I think would be a great scenario, is Cormier wins both belts and then retires. Now you leave 2 divisions open. But that just builds a whole lot of intrigue because now you've got all these contenders trying to get that belt, and you could maybe even build a mini tournament. You could figure something out to make it intriguing and crown a vacant champion in 2 divisions, maybe even on the same night, which I think would be great. I think that would be good business for the UFC. And then, of course, if Cormier ends up winning both belts, you can see what John Jones' status is. You can see if there's anybody a heavyweight. Maybe you could do a Verdum versus Cormier fight, or Cormier versus another heavyweight contender. Vacate the light heavyweight belt. Let Gustafsson try to fight for the light heavyweight belt again, because I think that he's a fantastic fighter. He could end up being the champion there. There are just so many different outcomes where there's no really bad long-term scenarios from this fight that stem from here. Now, if you go back to Conor versus Alvarez, that's a fight that had many bad long-term ramifications. Even at the time, it had bad long-term ramifications. And in my column, I outlined how that one fight is actually worse than all 3 of these super fights combined, because really the long-term casualties and the collateral damage caused by these 3 fights is minimal at best in every division, except for, as I argue in the column, and as I've said to you, the bantamweight division, where I think there are actually legitimate contenders.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you're slowly leaning me towards your way. I can see both sides, because I agree that it does make sense, because the thing is, super fights, when you have 2 stacked divisions, like when featherweight was, Conor McGregor did not clean out the 145-pound division, of course.
Yeah, like if you had the winner of Ferguson versus Khabib versus Holloway, it would be a disaster. Like, it just wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Unless Holloway was like, I'm vacating featherweight, my new home is going to be lightweight. That's what we're going to do. So, like I will argue against that kind of thing, because I think there are a ton of guys at lightweight that warrant the title shot, and featherweight too. There are a lot of guys coming up. So I can see that. I can see that as a valid point, that it is a short-term fix if the divisions have actual challengers. In this case, 5 of the 6 divisions don't have challengers. So That's why I'm for all three of these fights. I think that the timing is perfect for this exact scenario. It's weird because there's only been 2 champion versus champion fights previously in UFC history where you have 2 different division champions against each other, and you might have 3 on the same night, which is really uncharted territory. But I think it's worth exploring this uncharted territory based on what we're seeing right now. And Nick, that's why you have me on the show, so I can spit these truth bombs in the face of those who disagree, and
well, this is good. I mean,
sway you to a new direction.
When it's all agreement, podcasts are terrible when it's, oh, yeah, well, what do you think about this? Oh, I happen to agree too. Well, that's the show. And so I like that I'm not necessarily on your page, sort of agree. I mean, I can see both sides. That's the thing. I can see how this won't work. I can see how this will be a tremendous fight. I can see how this might work because I actually sort of, I see your point with letting, having basically taking Daniel Cormier out of the 205-pound picture for a little while. That'll give time for someone like a Gustafsson to get a couple more wins.
Because it's time to build a legit challenger. Because right now there really is not a set challenger at any of these divisions aside from bantamweight, and that just buys the division time to see, who the cream that rises to the top will be.
Although I still do think the UFC isn't doing enough, and maybe I'm not right here, but I feel like the UFC is not doing enough as far as building these 2 divisions. They need to, give it health almost, because these are
heavyweight.
Yeah,
there's just nothing there. Like it's a barren wasteland at this point because the champions have gone through the challengers. If you look at Stipe's resume, he's beaten the best of the best in that division, and if you look at Cormier's resume, he's beaten the best of the best, save for Jones, who's suspended. So I think this actually buys the light heavyweight division a little bit of time while we see what happens with John Jones and see how that plays out. Not to mention that it really gives John Jones the option of choosing which division he wants to go after if he does get reinstated in 2018 for whatever reason. He might want to go after Stipe if Stipe wins the heavyweight championship, or go after Cormier at heavyweight at a place where Cormier is more comfortable, and that makes it an intriguing fight. So who knows? Again, there's just a plethora of great options that can come in the long term from doing these fights, as opposed to preventing these fights from happening, as a result of worrying about long-term ramifications, because the ramifications are not dire.
Okay, well, let's stop there. Let's maybe we'll have you on July, the week of the fight, and we'll continue and break it down per se, or perhaps I should say. But let's move on. We're running out of time. Let's move on to UFC Fight Night Belem, UFC Fight Night 125. Eric Anders taking on Lyoto Machida this weekend on FS1 at 185 pounds. Interesting fight. Firstly, let me ask you. So we have Eric Anders, in a way unknown. I know he's sort of getting the push, proven by the fact that he's in a main event spot in his 3rd fight in the UFC, but he's still relatively unknown. He's new. He's young against these legends that are on the way down. Do you like this sort of fight, Machida versus Anders?
I love them because oftentimes the old guy wins. And if you look at the odds for this fight, like Anders is almost a 3-1 favorite against Machida. Really? Eric Anders? How long's Eric Anders been practicing MMA for? He's gonna outstrike Lyoto Machida? Eric Anders? Sorry, no disrespect to Eric Anders. I'm sure I've seen him fight. He's a great fighter, but who's Machida lost to? He's lost to like the top guys at light heavyweight and middleweight over his career. Brunson might not be a top guy, but I mean, look at who he's lost to. He lost to Romero. He lost to Chris Weidman, who was the champion at the time. Chris Weidman was a tough guy to stop then. He's lost to, at light heavyweight, Shogun, who was like a legend at the time. Like, look at who Lyoto's lost to. If Lyoto loses to Eric Anders, you may as well dig Lyoto's grave as any sort of, gatekeeper in the division anymore. Like, those odds blew me away when I saw them. I thought this was going to be like an even money fight. They think Eric Anders is that much better than Machida? Well, I don't know. I'm not sold, but that's why I love these fights, because I'd like to see Eric Anders prove that he's better than Machida. Build a new contender in the division. Take a guy at middleweight, that can be a guy like Apollo Costa and move his way up the ranks. That's why I like seeing these fights, because I can't believe that a guy like Eric Anders is going to beat Lyoto Machida. I won't believe it until I see it. So let's see it. Prove me wrong. Let's go, Eric Anders. I want to see you. I mean, you were on the Alabama Crimson Tide, the best college football team in the world. You went to the BCS championship. You won a BCS bowl. You've been at the top of the mountain in one sport. Let's see if you can get to the top of the mountain in this sport. That's what I want to see. I'm interested in seeing that. And that's how they should sell this fight, because to me, if he can beat Lyoto Machida, you've got like a legit new contender in that division. I know Lyoto Machida is not the Lyoto Machida of old, but like, let's see it. Let's see him outstrike Lyoto Machida. I'm interested.
It is an interesting fight, and I think these types of fights, despite them often resulting in a lot of sadness, I still can't say I dislike them, just because it is a good measuring stick. It is a good measuring device of where is Eric Anders. Like, I wasn't overly impressed with Eric Anders' second outing back in December when he defeated Marcus Perez by decision. I didn't think that was a tremendous performance. I thought his knockout over Rafael Natal in his debut last summer was fantastic. I think sort of the steam is sort of lessening a little bit on Anders. But these are good fights because Lyoto Machida, at the end of the day, he's not selling pay-per-views anymore. He's not a huge draw, he's still a headliner, as we see. But losing Machida as a top 15 middleweight, or even just as a fighter at all, won't harm the UFC long term. And so Eric Anders is a guy. He's marketable. Although he's not. Admittedly, he's not the best interview. But he does have the football stuff to talk about. He has, interesting takes, and clearly the UFC is looking at Anders as maybe a guy to market it going forward. And so these are good fights, because not only is it an opportunity to build a star, it's an opportunity to see how good this guy is. Because although, like, the thing is, a win over Lyoto Machida, if Eric Anders goes and knocks out Machida in round number 1, I don't know how much that really tells me about Anders, because then I instantly would start to think, oh, Machida is just that done. Like, I knew Machida was done, but now he's more done than I thought. And so, but if Machida wins, then we sort of see Anders as I thought, maybe isn't ready to go for the best of the best. Maybe Machida does have it. So it's a good fight. There's a lot of different outcomes. What are your thoughts on the rest of the card? A lot of people are saying this might be a better card than last week's, and it's tough to disagree.
This is a good card. It's a big night for Brazil, because Brazil's 1-9 so far this year. So let's see how these Brazilians do. I love the Pedro Munoz versus John Dodson fight. That's an excellent fight at bantamweight. Pedro Munoz has been underrated for so long, and John Dodson is a real warrior. So that's an exciting fight. And I think that's going to move someone up in the bantamweight division. It's always nice to see Valentina Shevchenko do her thing. She's against somebody who was a former crack addict that has been competing in MMA for 18 months, who I think is kind of over her head here in Priscilla Cachoeira in the co-main event. So, if Valentina gets a win, she should get the next title shot at flyweight. Like, there's really no question. But I'm interested to see. I mean, you've got a debuting fighter you don't know much about, who's overcome a lot in her life. So I'm interested to see what she can do. Do you have any of the other fights in front of you? I'm drawing a bit of a blank.
Well, we have Michelle Prazeres versus Desmond Green. We also have Timothy Johnson versus Marcelo Gome. And Marcelo Gome,
Timothy Johnson's an underdog in that fight. Really?
That doesn't surprise me. Marcelo Gome, his debut, he looked fantastic. He got a quick knockout win over, let's see here. I think so it was against Christian Colombo. That doesn't tell me a lot.
The worst heavyweight in the UFC. No disrespect to Christian Colombo, because I wouldn't get into a cage with anybody. He's one of the worst heavyweights in the UFC. And Marcelo Gome's track record beforehand was fighting guys with like 0-0 records. So let's pump the brakes on Marcelo Gome a little bit here, because I think Timothy Johnson is going to steamroll him. And seeing Timothy Johnson as an underdog was like, oh, it's the same with Eric Anders. Seeing him as that big of a favorite, I was like, when I first looked at the odds, I was like, okay, well, all right, that's interesting. But,
another fun one is the first fight on the main card: Thiago Santos versus Anthony Lionheart Smith. That's
a fun one. That could be fight of the night. Both of those guys are action fighters. Santos had a bit of a stretch where he was losing, and then people were like writing him off, and then he started flooring guys again. So I'm always interested to see what Thiago Santos can do, and Anthony Smith is a really fun fighter as well. That win over, who did he get a win over recently? Was it Belfort?
Hector Lombard.
Oh, Lombard. I knew it was one of the older guys that used to be was considered a legend of the sport, and that was a good win for him.
It was.
So I'm interested to see how he reacts to fighting a guy in his prime like Santos.
And there's one prelim that really stands out to me. It's the first televised prelim of the night: Yuri Alcantara versus Joe Soto. I saw someone on Twitter, I forget who it was earlier today, say they don't, this is one of the couple fights on the card they don't care about. I actually like this fight. I think we could see some really good grappling in Soto Alcantara. And also in the featured Fight Pass prelim, we have David Jean Figueiredo taking on Joseph Morales. Again,
two undefeated flyweights,
sort of, undefeated, sort of unknown, but I think that could also be interesting as well. That, this is a sneaky good card. I think we don't have a ton of big names or top ranked guys, but I think it might stylistically be a fun night of fights.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well when I saw this the card. I was thinking, there's not a whole lot of sellable names outside of Machida to the average fan, to the the layman. But when you look at the card from top to bottom, and of course John Dodson, I think is a solid name. But if you look at the card from top to bottom, you've got a lot of really good fighters, and you've got a lot of really good matchups. So I'm interested to see what happens in those fights. I think Shevchenko could steamroll Cachoeira, but Shevchenko's like a 7-1 favorite in that fight. That said, I don't know what I'm looking for with Cachoeira. I haven't seen her any of her fights before, so maybe she's good. I don't know. That'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what she looks like, Shevchenko, at 125. But it's a good card. I like it a lot.
Sure. Let's go through, I guess. What do we want to do as far as predictions? Maybe the last three fights, maybe the main event, Dodson, Munoz, and Shevchenko is going to win. That's kind of our predictions. I think I can speak on your behalf as well. Is there anything else you want to touch on more so than we already did, or should we just maybe talk a little more about Machida Anders as far as who we actually think will win? What do you want to do? Any preference?
Yeah, sure. We can predict. Yeah, we can predict the top three. If you want to just discard Shevchenko and Cachoeira and do the three fights at the top aside from that one, let's do that. Let's not insult the intelligence of our listeners here and pretend that we're picking against Shevchenko.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with the co-main event: John Dodson, Pedro Munoz, Magician versus the Young Punisher. Dodson, I want to say, is a favorite, although the odds, I believe, are pretty close. Yeah. This is an interesting fight. I mean, Dodson, you can argue that he has done record-wise a lot better at bantamweight than he's had. I thought he beat John Lineker. I thought he lost to World Series of Fighting, drawing a blank here. Moraes, Marlon Moraes. I thought Moraes beat him, but you could have made the argument otherwise. So Dodson could be undefeated. You could make the argument at 135 since moving back up. What do you make of this one? Do you think Munoz has a shot here? He's coming off a submission over Rob Font. Impressive. He's been doing good as well.
Yeah, this is a really tough fight to call, but I'm going to lean Dodson. And the reason I'm going to lean Dodson is because Munoz is a guy who benefits from people's mistakes, from getting into tricky situations with people. He's a guy that's able to capitalize on those who try to get too close to him, who try to grapple with him. But with Dodson, I think he's going to play this fight very smart. It's a 3-round fight. I think Dodson's going to get in and out with his striking, and I think that he's going to frustrate Munoz because he's not going to give Munoz those opportunities to capitalize. And I think that's why Dodson will outpoint him. I think you'll see Dodson win a decision here. I don't think he knocks him out or anything, and I don't think that Munoz is going to be able to stop Dodson because who's the last guy aside from DJ to be able to stop Dodson? I don't think anybody has in the UFC. So
DJ didn't even stop Dodson.
In the rematch, he didn't.
2 decisions.
2 decisions. Okay, never mind. I'm blanking there on that. So nobody stopped Dodson in the UFC.
Yeah.
So if this is going to be a point fight and this is going to be a 3-round fight that goes to the cards, I'm going to lean Dodson.
I agree. I hate to keep it a little boring by sort of siding with who you picked and not making it giving the fans some diversity. But I think Dodson gets it done. He's the better striker in this one. It really comes down to where this fight plays out. Munoz is the better grappler. And could Munoz grapple Dodson en route to a decision win? Sure, he could. But I feel like Dodson is just, has what it takes to keep this one standing, and where he'll be quicker and where he'll be able to basically strike his way to a decision. I don't see him knocking Munoz out. I don't know if Munoz has ever been stopped. Munoz is very good. He only has 2 losses. You're looking at the records, you might, be deceived, but Dodson is very good. Obviously, he has 9 losses, but he only loses to top talent, and he doesn't lose. A lot of those are fairly early on as well. So I like Dodson here. And with that, let's go to the main event. As we talked about earlier, Lyoto Machida, the Dragon, taking on rising contender Eric, ya boy, Anders. Now, Anders is good. I hate his nickname. I don't know how you feel about that, but
I like your boy.
How do you feel about whether his chances against the former champion?
Like I said off the top, show me.
I want
I want to see you beat Machida. I want to see you outstrike Lyoto Machida. I have to go with Machida. I think that the amount of striking experience that Lyoto Machida has versus the amount that Eric Anders has is like there's a chasm between them. So when I look at these two fighters, like I just don't see how Anders is going to beat him, save for catching him with a puncher's chance on the chin. I mean, Machida's chin is suspect, sure, but how many guys have actually finished Machida with strikes? I mean, you're talking about Shogun, you're talking about Brunson, and you're talking about I think Yoel Romero.
Yeah,
and Weidman was a decision. So, those are elite names. And Eric Anders is an up-and-comer, sure, but he's had 2 UFC fights. And we're talking about a guy who's a former champion who, sure, I mean, Brunson caught him, but Brunson's caught a lot of people in the first round. Lyoto is just part of that collection that Derek Brunson has, the Derek Brunson collection. So, well, again, I would like to see it. I'd like to see Eric Anders win that fight. I want there to be a new contender. I just think he's in over his head. And I think that at those odds, people should be all over Machida.
Well, we got some dissension, and so I'm happy about that. I am going with you, boy. I'm going with Eric Anders. I like him.
He's not my boy. He's your boy. You're picking him, right?
Fair enough. My boy, although that's even worse of a nickname. So Eric Anders, I know you're not listening, but in any case, do not change your nickname. Well, change it, but if you do, don't change it.
You can't change it to my boy.
No, that would be worse.
But in this case, he's my boy for you. He's your boy.
This is getting confusing. So let's just talk about why Anders is going to beat Machida. Basically, maybe I'll be wrong. I'm 0-3 in main event predictions in 2018. So, my not having the best luck as far as main event predictions. So maybe you'll be right. Maybe Machida will just be able to outpoint him over 25 minutes. But over 25 minutes, I don't see how Eric Anders doesn't stop Machida. Again, this is a fade on Machida. Was my Brunson pick a fade on Jacare? And did Jacare prove me wrong? Sure, he did. Could Machida prove me wrong? Sure. But I feel like Machida, after losing to Brunson, and he's definitely a step behind Jacare, and I think it's quite clear that he's more done than, Jacare. Here, I like Eric Anders' athleticism. The guy's a former football player. He's super athletic. He can go 25 minutes. He's big, he's strong, but he does have cardio. Typically, I know he had a bit of 5-round experience fights over at LFA. He won the title over Brendan Allen. That was a 25-minute fight. It was a bit of a grinder, but we saw that he doesn't totally fade. He can go 25 minutes and not like pass out due to overexhaustion or whatever. So I like that about Anders, but also I think his wrestling. Eric Anders should be able to take Lyoto Machida down, and I think just pound him out. I like Eric. I think this will go past the first round, but I think maybe hit second or third. I think Eric Anders is going to be on top of Machida, raining down ground and pound and forcing a stoppage. So I like Eric Anders. I'll go third round. I think Machida, takes him into kind of deep waters, but won't be enough. Although this isn't all Eric Anders. Machida, as long as this is standing on the feet, Machida's winning the fight. Of course, Eric Anders does have power. He could just land something big and knock him out like Brunson did. I don't see it being a standing KO because Anders' striking is still a little green. Eric Anders is green as a fighter as a whole. And so maybe you'll be right. Maybe Machida could do it. He could just, strike his way to a victory because he's very elusive. Although Eric Anders did work with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson ahead of this fight. So I think I think he did it right as far as preparing for Machida. And so it's going to be interesting. I think it's closer than the odds indicate, but I'm not surprised Anders is a favorite. I'm going Eric Anders, third round TKO. And with that, let's move on to one of our first two segments. We're close to wrapping the show up. Gets it, doesn't get it. The first one we got is the UFC for re-signing Al Iaquinta. So they signed Iaquinta to what is apparently a one-fight deal. So that's interesting. But they finally gave Iaquinta mostly what he wants. And so I'm happy about that because that means Iaquinta is going to fight again. He's fighting Paul Felder in April. Does the UFC get it here? Do you think UFC gets it or doesn't get it?
Yeah, I think they get it. I think the one-fight deal is smart on their part because it's win-win for them. If Iaquinta gets a good win and he does so in his home state and looks really good doing it, then let's talk next deal, no problem. And if he doesn't want to fight again, I don't think Al is a big enough name that they can, I think they can afford to have him sit out if he wants to sit out. But, I think that he was not getting paid fairly. I think 80-50 is a very fair number for what Al Iaquinta brings to a card. So, He gets it. The UFC gets it. Let's get it.
Historically, the UFC in many situations have not given fighters what they deserve. Even if fighter pay is low as a whole, but even still, on that curve, sometimes fighters are sort of ripped off. So I think the UFC obviously gets it. I don't think you can go the other way and make a fair argument. The UFC gets it for, Alec Quinta. He's an interesting guy. Like a huge draw, but I think he can pull, some numbers, maybe as a co-main event on a fight night or something like that. Maybe a fight night, or maybe, in down the road, he'll headline a card. I think re-signing him is a good move. And I like that they gave him what he wants. And I hope that number goes up afterwards if he does get past Paul Felder. Next one, Ronda Rousey. Big news for her. We didn't talk about it, but she signed full-time with the WWE. Does Ronda Rousey get it or not get it?
I think she gets it. We're talking about imagination land, so there's no bigger way to up your profile again by being a star in another realm. And I think that, I think there's not much more for her to accomplish in MMA, to be honest. Some still make the case that she's the most, the best female mixed martial artist ever, and I think that they can make that case. But I think that this is a good move for her and a good move for the WWE.
I can't disagree. Ronda Rousey gets it for signing with the WWE. She's not going to fight again. I think that's pretty fair to say in MMA, that is. And so if she's not doing that, there isn't a reason not to sign with the WWE. She stays relevant as far as live events go. I can't call pro wrestling a sport, but as far as live entertainment goes, she'll stay relevant. She'll stay relevant in MMA news just because, on occasion we'll cover her, her matches, her wrestling matches. And so, there's no downside to it. Am I interested in Ronda Rousey in the WWE? Of course not. I don't like pro wrestling. And so am I going to watch? No. But as far as business goes and as far as just her career, there's really no better path for Ronda Rousey.
Here's the doesn't get it. The doesn't get it part is Ramona Shelburne asks her, to reflect on her losses to Holm and Nunes. And she says, I'm not ready to talk about that yet. When's the time going to be? It's been over a year. It's been you still won't talk about it? Really?
I have the list in front of me, so there's no proof of this, but the next one was Ronda Rousey for not talking about the losses or for basically declining not to.
Yeah, come on. It's been over a year. What, you're not going to talk about it? Okay, so what do you say? This is the only way that this plays out as a long play to not talk about it. If her WWE career takes off and she becomes this astronomical star with the WWE and writes a book, and she writes a book about a follow up to her book, which was the New York Times bestseller, and talks about the losses, then it's a good long play. But that's a very long play, and you'd have to have a lot of forethought to think of it that way. So I don't know why she won't talk about those fights. It's, she doesn't owe us anything. That's fine, but it really continues to make her look like she is just not a very good loser.
I agree. And that's why I said it, because I wanted to get in. At least one doesn't get it. We have one more, but we'll get to that in a sec. And next one, Khabib Nurmagomedov said, actually, Ali Abdelaziz, his manager, said that Khabib would consider and is considering, after the Tony Ferguson fight, if he fights Conor McGregor afterwards, after those two fights, the gloves, riding off in the sunset, doing whatever else, just stopping fighting. Do you think again, I think fighting McGregor at the end of this year is a stretch. I don't know if that happens. I don't think it would, but after two big fights, including the Ferguson fight in April, if Khabib says goodbye to MMA, do you think he would get it there or not get it?
This is a big if, because Khabib's health has been a massive factor in this part of his career. He's fought once, twice in the last 3 years or something along those lines. Might even be 4 years. I'll believe it when I see it. But if he ends up beating Ferguson and beating Conor and wants to retire, sure, more power to him. It's fine with me.
I agree. He'll make a lot of money. He'll make a lot of money to fight Ferguson, especially if he wins. He'll make a lot of money, even more so to fight Conor. And if he wins, he's on the top of the world, but UFC term or standards. But kind of like George St. Pierre, retiring when you're the champion, retiring when you're sort of at the top of your career. In a way, not the worst decision, especially with Khabib. As you said, his health issues, he's been hurt a lot of times. And so Khabib's not going to be sticking around when he's 40 years old, but I would be scared to see Khabib fighting at 40, because I think that'd be really bad as far as...
Let's get to 30 first. How old is Khabib? I don't even think he's 30 yet, is he?
Might not be. If he late 20s, maybe early 30s, but let me find out real quick. He is 29. There you go.
Let's get to 30. Then we can talk getting to 40.
Exactly. Next one, we have Cain Velasquez. I don't know. No, I know this isn't ideal for him, but he said on the MMA Hour yesterday that 205 isn't out of the realm of possibilities. He would do it if he had to, drop down to light heavyweight. If he does, again, a big if. I don't think Cain will ever fight at 205, but he said it, so I want to briefly talk about it. If that happens, is that a good move? Does he get it or not get it?
No, he doesn't get it. This is a guy with a bevy of health issues. You're going to cut down to 205 now. Cormier's retiring in a year, dude. Just hang out. How about you make the walk for one fight? Let's see if you've got one fight where you can get to the fight healthy and you're good to go, and then we can go from there. Like, let's not count our eggs before they hatch here, Cain. I like Cain a lot, and he's an amazing fighter. And if there's anybody that can make a case that they're the best heavyweight outside of Stipe, it's him. But let's get to that first fight first. If you're going to fight at 226 at heavyweight, let's see how that plays out, and then we can talk 205. But 205 just does not sound like a good idea.
I don't even think the biggest issue is talking before he's back. I mean, sure, would it make more sense to maybe bring this up after he actually fights again, since the Travis Brown fight in July 2016? Sure, but the biggest issue is just they had Cain Velasquez should not, I don't think he can, healthily cut down to 205. And so if he tries, I don't think he gets it. But I guess when you're best friends with the heavyweight champion, if Cormier beats Stipe, which is a possibility, I guess you sort of do what you have to do. But if he tries to fight at 205, which again I don't think will end up happening, can't say Cain Velasquez would get it.
Cormier is retiring in March of 2019. Like, Cain can wait. Cain wants to stay active and take 3 fights this year. Come on, like let's get real here.
It's true. Last one, Michael Bisping. Now, it's unclear exactly what is happening or the reason, but Michael Bisping, according to him, will not be fighting at the UFC London card on March 17th. It was reported by Ariel Helwani that Rashad Evans' fight was being talked about. It was being targeted for the card. For whatever reason, we don't know why yet. It's not happening. Now, if it's Bisping turning the fight down for whatever reason, do you think Bisping gets it or not get it?
I don't know. I think at this point, Bisping can decide to do whatever he wants to do. Apparently, his family's telling him to retire. If he retires, I think he's had an unbelievable career. But there's also been rumors for a while that they might be doing a Manchester card because of Darren Till. And Manchester is where Bisping's from. So if you can stack a Manchester card with Darren Till and with Michael Bisping, like that becomes a really big event over there. This London event is a bit of a disaster. It's like a month away. So for Bisping not wanting to compete in that card, I get it. And I think he gets it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I said it right after the Gaston fight. Like, ever since that knockout loss, they'd been talking, hey, Bisping, Belfort in London, let's do it. Makes sense. Retirement fight for both. Loser leaves town, whatever you want to say. Loser goes back to their family, rides off, and, anything. It makes sense. But, or even if it wasn't Belfort, Bisping versus Blank makes sense in London.
Evans makes sense.
I didn't think it made. I didn't like. I like Belfort, Bisping too. I like the fight, but I didn't think Bisping should turn around that quickly. Like, he got choked out, unconscious, and knocked out in the same month, and not long ago. And so a quick turnaround after that, after a horrendous November. Horrendous as far as losing fights, not so horrendous as far as his bank account is concerned. But I didn't think London made sense, and so I'm glad that it looks like he would agree, or at least someone agrees, and maybe it is Bisping, maybe it's Rashad Evans, who knows. But if that's the case, I do think Michael Bisping gets it. And last order of business before we get out of here, dumb questions. We haven't done these on the show for a couple weeks, so I'm looking forward to this. Let me just find them.
The dumber the better. Let's go.
Dumber the better. The first one isn't actually a dumb question. And so it was funny. Alex Scafidi at Alex_Scafidi on Twitter. I guess she wasn't exactly aware that dumb questions was a real thing. She thought I was joking, so she submitted a serious question. But this isn't just. We're not exclusive to dumb questions, so we'll answer it anyways. And it happens to be about the man we just talked about. She says, if Bisping has one more fight left, who do you want to see him fight and where?
Well, I think Manchester, like I just mentioned, would be fantastic, and I like the Rashad Evans matchup. I think that's a fight that makes a lot of sense for both of them, because I think win or lose, Bisping will retire, and I think win or lose, Evans should retire. I think Evans should have already retired, honestly, but that's a fight that I think would be a lot of fun. It's an Ultimate Fighter 2 versus Ultimate Fighter 3 winner. Good storyline. They're buddies on the Fox broadcast, so they can jar at each other there. It'd be a good way to set that up. So that's what my pick would be. I think you headline that card with Darren Till versus somebody, maybe Stephen Thompson in Manchester, and then you have as the co-main event Bisping versus Rashad Evans. That would be a really nice card for that market.
David Branch, UFC Orlando, short notice.
David Branch.
No, yeah, it's not a dumb question, so I gotta make it dumb. So I gave a dumb answer instead.
Okay.
No, but no. The thing is, Bisping should not fight in February. I said he shouldn't fight in March. So if that happens, oh geez, I can't imagine how that would play out. But honestly, I like the Vitor Belfort fight. I know it's not going to happen. I like the idea of Manchester as long as it's not tomorrow. I'm okay with that. That makes sense to me. Retiring in your hometown, I'm for that. I don't actually like the Evans fight. I know it makes sense, but I don't have much intrigue for that. I like the Belfort fight. Otherwise, I don't know. I really don't know. Dan Kelly. I mean, there aren't that many options, so it kind of is too bad that the Belfort fight didn't happen or didn't work out. But yeah, that's sort of my answer. Next question from Go Paulo. Follow him on Twitter at Go Paulo MMA. He says, "What gets you unfollowed by MMA Twitter faster? A, tweeting about fake fighting WWE, or B, tweeting about Donald Trump, regardless of allegiance?"
Yeah, a surefire way to lose followers is to tweet, do pro or anti-Trump tweets. So I'm going to go with that. I think people can handle wrestling as long as you're not doing too much of it.
I tend to agree. I'm very anti. I mean, I'm anti both, anti-Trump and anti-WWE.
Unfollowed.
What's that?
Unfollowed.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I feel like one I can handle. Like, I feel like as far as the audience of MMA fans that is anti-WWE and anti-Trump, I feel like anti-politics in general. Stay to sports, stick to sports. I feel like that's a bit more, a bit of a stronger opinion. So I'll have to agree and go with option B. Next question comes from Nicole Bosco. You can follow her on Twitter at NIKBOS. She says, "Could either of you beat Mayweather in an MMA bout?"
Can I answer for both of us? No.
Sure. You can speak on my behalf. Yeah.
We couldn't.
Even if we do 6 months of jiu-jitsu training.
If it was both of us, I don't think we could.
Both of us, yeah. I don't. Maybe I'm a little more optimistic than you are.
Hey, come on. Let's not get crazy here. Next question. 2
versus 1. It's a close fight. It's intriguing, but I'd still have to go with Money Mayweather. Next question, and I don't know if this is a dumb question because it wasn't in direct response to my tweet asking for these, but Eiley Litty, I apologize for butchering your name, at Jerry_M_Carlo on Twitter. He says, "Have you noticed a trend of losing fighters getting popped more frequently for steroids? I think it's interesting, and someone should dig deeper into it."
I mean, I'd have to look at who the test failures were because I don't know off the top of my head. I have noticed that's happened, but I don't know if it's mutually exclusive or what the situation is with that. So I don't know. I've noticed that there haven't been a lot of big name people outside of John Jones that have been getting popped for potential anti-doping violations in recently. Other than him, I guess Junior Dos Santos would be another big name. But it seems like USADA has actually done a good job of cleaning up the sport.
Yeah, definitely. Although it is interesting. Like I feel like if you're on steroids, you should be winning. So if you're on steroids and losing, that's just find a different career path. That's sort of what I think. Last one. This isn't a question, but Liam Hughes at Twitter shit on Twitter. Well, as I mentioned earlier, long-time listener to the show. He just wants us to talk about poutine for a while. But I'm Canadian. He was hoping you were American, so you didn't have the bias. But then he found out you were Canadian as well, and this is just poutine bias. We should change the name of the show to poutine bias. If you were to come on,
it's a wonderful food. It's a fantastic food, and I've heard a lot of Americans when I'm on the road covering the sport slag it and say that it's nothing special. It's a very special food. It holds a special place in my heart, in the clogged arteries of my heart, and I think that we should all embrace poutine. And if you don't like it, there might be something wrong with you. It's a fantastic food.
As a Canadian, I'm ashamed to say this, but I've never had poutine.
Yeah, you should be ashamed to say that. You should go tomorrow and find any place that has poutine and purchase it and enjoy every moment of it and every morsel of those delicious cheese curds that are engulfed in gravy on top of wonderful French fries. What part of poutine don't you like?
No. I mean, I can't say I dislike it. I can't say I like it because I've never tried it.
Might have to just peace out.
No kidding. You can do that.
Terrible take. Have poutine, please.
No. This isn't my dislike of poutine. I just like, as far as why I haven't ever eaten poutine, I don't know. As far as early when I was growing up or younger, I mean, I'm still young, but maybe before the teenage years, I don't know why I never ate poutine.
Next time I'm on the show, Nick, I want you to have poutine with you, and I want to watch you eat poutine for the first time. And you can just give me topics, and I'll riff on them, and I'll just, I'll freestyle, and I'll keep talking while I get to watch you enjoy poutine for the first time, because it's something you should do.
People typically say eating while podcasting or doing radio isn't the best, but I think when it's poutine, we get a pass.
I'm with you. You won't have to do any talking. You can just eat, and I'll just go.
That'll be the podcast. Screw the MMA circus. Who cares about mixed martial arts when?
Well, it would be a circus. If you want to be true to the name, you should do circus elements, and that's an attraction. Is you eating poutine for the first time?
That's a good segment idea. We'll introduce that maybe even next week. Dumb questions, gets it, doesn't get it, and eating poutine.
Yeah, enjoying poutine for the first time. You should do it. I don't know what's wrong with you.
My theory, but my idea is that I've gotten into 17 years of my life without eating a morsel of poutine, not because I like it, or dislike it, but now I feel like since I've waited all this long anyways, I might as well just wait until I get the best poutine. So I'm going to wait, and I am sticking to this for sure. I'm going to wait to eat poutine for the first time until I go to Quebec for the first time. That is my plan.
Oh, you'll just be missing out.
Am I stupid for that? Do you think
you'll just be missing out? Go to A&W. They've got good poutine. They do. It's good. It's serviceable fast food poutine that does the trick.
Better than poutine straight from Quebec?
No, but you're not in Quebec.
Yeah, that's why I'm waiting. All right. I think that's it.
You're saving yourself for Quebec. I can appreciate that.
Exactly. I think that's it. Thank you, Aaron, for coming on. Thanks for talking some MMA and some poutine. I know we made Liam happy. He is actually eating poutine tomorrow for the first time. So this guy lives in the UK and he's eating poutine before I am. So again, I should be ashamed of myself, but nonetheless, thank you for coming on. Let everybody know where they can find you on social media and plug away as far as your work, and of course, your column that you've mentioned on the show as well.
All right, at Aaron Bronsteter on Twitter. If you need to know how to spell that, just go to Nick's account, and he has tagged me in some tweets today, so you can find me there. tsn.ca/UFC for all of our UFC coverage from TSN. And really you can find everything there. And then there's the TSN MMA show, which is my podcast with Bazooka Joe Valtellini, the voice of Glory and former Glory welterweight champion. And he's always really good at giving a technical breakdown of what's happened at the different UFC cards. And we have big interviews every week. So be sure to check that out on the TSN MMA show. Just look that up on Google and you'll find us. You can subscribe on iTunes or any other podcast platform. And Nick, I know I say this to you whenever I chat with you. I think that what you do is great. You're doing a great job. For someone your age to be this far ahead of the game is very refreshing to see, and I'm happy to see you keep at it. Go get that journalism diploma and keep doing what you're doing. And I appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and of course, no problem about having you on. And hopefully, I will have you on a lot sooner. Hopefully, I mean, I guess we better be talking before 2 years. I know we will, because I'm likely actually moving to Toronto in September for journalism school.
Oh, where are you going?
And so, well, I don't know for sure because the application is in, have yet to receive a response, but the application to Ryerson is in. So,
oh, wow.
That is,
good on you, man. That's a great program.
So looking forward to that. But you guys can find me on Twitter at Nick Baldwin MMA. You can find all of my MMA coverage over at bloodyelbow.com. Just starting today, I'll actually be handling some of their social media stuff. I'll be doing their Instagram and doing frequent posts on that. And so go check that out. If you're not following them already, it's at Bloody Elbow on Instagram. Pretty easy to find. Feel free to follow my MMA Instagram account, fairly new, at Nick Baldwin MMA. I also launched a Facebook page over the weekend Facebook.com/Nick Baldwin MMA. So if you can go give that a like, I would certainly appreciate that. Check out my other shows, Before the Battle and Beyond Combat. They are exclusive on this YouTube channel. Please, if you're feeling generous, give this video a thumbs up down there. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And any concerns, any comments, any questions, any feedback, whether you hated this show, you loved it, or anywhere in between, go down in the comment section and drop a note, and I would appreciate that as well. So thank you all for listening. We really do appreciate it. You can find the MMA Circus on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Google Play, BloodyElbow.com, SoundCloud, here on YouTube, of course. TuneIn, Player FM, Overcast, Podcast Addict, and pretty much anywhere else you can find a podcast. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate it. For Aaron Bronsteter, my name is Nick Baldwin, and we're out.